Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Let's see here. Okay, this is interesting. Oh dear, sometimes. Okay, there we go. All right. Let's try again. Success. So we are still, of course, this discussion, this return of the brothers to Egypt. This is their second visit with Benjamin. And again, the tension is mounting and mounting until we're going to get to the very heart of the story. So here we go. The brothers had been told that they were going to be dining with Joseph. They were taken to his quarters, his palace, I suppose, and they were very worried because they knew they were going to be isolated now from anyone else, and they were going to now be completely under his control, and they're very worried about it. And they thought maybe it had to do with the fact that the money they had brought the first time to pay for the provisions had all been returned, and they might be accused of stealing, etc. They'd already been accused of spying, and so clearly they'd come to the attention. They were people of interest, let's say that, right? And that's not a good place to be. So they tell the administrator or the person, the servant who's bringing them into Joseph's palace, that it was a mistake, that they have more money, that they brought additional money, and we'll see what he says. This is his response. Vayomer shalom lachem. He says, no problem, right? You're okay. You're in good shape. Al tira'u, you should not fear. Do not be afraid. Do not be alarmed. Elohechem ve'Elohei avichem, your God and the God of your fathers, which is interesting, right? Natan lachem matmon, has given you treasure ba'amtechotechem, in your sacks. Kaspechem ba'elai, your money came to me. Vayotze alehem et Shimon, and he brought out Shimon to them. He returned Shimon to them. So Rashi's going to take a look at this Elohechem ve'Elokei avichem. Why such an expression, and what is the Torah trying to tell us in that particular phrase? So here we are, Elohechem, your God. And this is from a midrash. We've often quoted Midrash Rabbah. This is from another midrash, which is on the Chumash, on the 5 books, which is called Tanchuma. It is also extant, by the way. B'zchutechem. So he says, your God, meaning, and because it's Elohim, remember that's got to do with divine justice. B'zchutechem, on your merit, because you deserved it. Ve'em zechutechem kidai, but if your merit is not sufficient, ve'Elohei avichem, then on the God of your fathers, b'zchut avichem, on account of your fathers, in the merit of your fathers, naten lachem machmon, he has given to you treasure. And I think the takeaway here is just how important, whatever we do, the implications are there on our children. That if we, or our descendants, or those who are influenced by us, our students, at any rate, that our lives are so interconnected. And of course, my sense of a modernity is the importance of individualism, that part of our modernistic way of looking at life is how important we have become to look at ourselves as individuals. And here we're being told that what we do has tremendous influence on the lives of others, in a universalistic kind of way as well, and how we have additional reason and motivation to try to live lives of righteousness, because that righteousness doesn't just benefit ourselves, it benefits anyone who comes into our sphere, and certainly for sure our relatives and our family and our children. So and of course, there are many implications of this. And so there's also another element too, and that is the fact that we can go all the way back to our ancestors, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their families, and the kinds of lives that they lived. So, Vayaveh ha'ish ha'anashim beita Yosef, and the man brought the men into the house of Joseph. Vayiten mayim, and he gave water. He provided water. Vayirchatzu raglehem, and they washed their feet. Vayiten mispo lachamorehem, and he gave fodder to their donkeys. So there's a little bit of an echo of what Rebecca did for Eliezer and the camels, just a concern for their animals as well, not just them, but their animals as well. Just a lovely little detail there. Here we are. So, vayave, right? He brought, it's a causative form of the verb ha'ish. The man brought. So he says, hava'a achar hava'a. He said, Rashi is saying that this particular verb is mentioned twice. And actually, if you go back, we're going to look at this right now, right? So we've got vayave ha'ish, et ha'anashim, beita Yosef. The man brought the men, that is the brothers, of course, into the house of Joseph. And let's go back now to verse 17, and we'll see that we have exactly that phrase, right? Vayave ha'ish et ha'anashim beita Yosef. There it is. And Rashi's picking up on the fact that he brought them and he brought them, right? It's mentioned twice. And he's picking up on that. And let's take a look. So that's the hava'a achar hava'a, bringing after bringing. And this is the comment. The fi shahayu dochafim oto. And the reason is that initially the brothers were pushing him. Lidchof means to sort of hustle and push, and Safaria translates dochafim as hustling him. But lidchof means to push, right? Chutz, outside, ad shedibru elav petach habayit, until they were able to speak to him at the entrance of the house, of Joseph's house. Umisha amar lahem shalom lachem. In other words, they were just so concerned that this was happening to them, that they kept pushing at him, telling him, not necessarily negatively, I would say, but just you see how important it was for them to tell him about the money and all that, and try to explain what was going on. So, and then he finally said, Shalom lachem, you're okay, no problem. Nimshachu, they then ba'uva'u acharav, they simply followed, they came together and followed him. So that was the second hava'ah. Vayachinu et hamincha, the brothers understood, prepared the gift, ad bo Yosef bat Zahoraim, until Joseph came at noon. Ki shamu, because they had heard, ki sham yochlu lechem, because that they would eat bread. In other words, that they would partake of a meal there at noon and with him. Let's take a look here. Vayachinu. So what do we mean they prepared, right? Izminu, right? So they brought it together. Itruhu, literally it means they crowned it. But here in this context, it means they made it look attractive, like presentation. Bekelim na'im, in lovely vessels, right? Plates and things. So they adorned it, they made it look, when they brought the food, they wanted it to look attractive. And of course, we know how important presentation is with regards to food. But again, just so the takeaway really is how important it was for them to want to make it appetizing and something that he would find, that Joseph would find a lovely thing. And of course, again, presentation has a lot to do with how much you care and how much you respect the person you're presenting this to. So the trouble, remember, the trouble you take is a way of showing love and respect. Vayavo Yosef Habaita. Joseph came home. Vayaviu lo et hamincha, and they brought him the gift, asher beyadam, which was literally in their hands, habaita, into the house. Now, this habaita and habaita is going to trouble Rashi a little bit, because they are already in the house. So why is it saying it again? Vayishtachavu lo arza, and they prostrated themselves to the ground. Right, total submission. Take a look here. So, habaita. So Rashi says these habaitas, mi prosdor, from the entrance chamber, letraklim, to the banquet hall. That's the bringing into the house the second time. Now, this parenthetical phrase here would come from I believe it's from an editor, whether the editor in this case is Baruch Halevi Epstein, the author of this commentary here, or whether when he put this in his book, when Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein wrote this commentary, whether he found it in another edition of Rashi, but at any rate, this is very clear that it's an editorial comment. So he says, Nir'eh, it appears, Diuko de Rashi, that Rashi making this specific comment, in other words, his need to explain that it was from the entrance chamber into the banquet hall, right? It's a detail. So why is Rashi sharing this detail? So this is what the editor is trying to explain. Mi habaita batra'a, from the second habaita mentioned in this sentence, right? Here it is, habaita first time, habaita the second time. Why twice? Right. So that's the issue. Vayaviu lo et hamincha asher beyadam habaita. Right. It could have just said they brought him the present, which was in their hands. Why does it say a second time habaita? Dekashele, because Rashi is having a problem, right? There's a problem with this. Halok var, because it's already mentioned. Huva'u beito shel Yosef, that they brought it into Joseph's house. So why does it say it a second time? Ella al korkacha, but he says a fortiori, you are forced to say, tzarich lomar, one has to say, mi prosdor letraklim, to say that what this verse is trying to do is give us a detail as to their waiting outside the banquet hall for him to arrive and taking the food then into the banquet hall. Now, again, I mean, this still leaves me with a question, which is, so what's the significance of this detail? And for the time being, I have to just leave it as a question out there and hope that at some point or another, I will understand better what this is trying to say. Having said that, I will tell you that there is a parallel passage in Pirkei Avot, which talks about the purpose of this life in which we are currently living. And it makes the comparison of preparing ourselves, that life here is a preparation for immortality. And basically it says in this passage in Pirkei Avot, it uses the same kind of phraseology by saying that this life can be compared to a prosdor, that we should see this life as an antechamber. And it says in Pirkei Avot, it says, prepare yourself in the antechamber that you may enter the banquet hall. So the next life after death, is in Pirkei Avot, is compared to a banquet hall. And just as when you go to a formal banquet, you want to take some care in preparing yourself to go into this, dressing yourself nicely, making sure that you're clean, etc. Those can all be translated into spiritual values, that we are careful in this life to see that whatever enjoyment and pleasure we have is just very, very brief, and that the real purpose here is to prepare ourselves. And whether or not there's any suggestion of the parallel here, because what's going to happen is that just as our lives, in a sense, are resolved in the next life, that at the point of death, there's an accountability for the way in which we lived our lives currently. And based on that accountability, we face whatever consequences will be in the next world. Likewise, in this particular story, everything's going to start getting resolved in the next stage. The whole issue, as you'll see, it'll be left as a question mark. It's going to come to a crisis, but that crisis will be resolved next week. So we're left hanging with this particular parsha at the end of this particular parsha. So that's a possibility, that there's some sort of parallel there. And that's what's being suggested in the language that's being used and the detail of that language. So let's see where we are. Vayish'al lahem l'shalom, and he inquired of their welfare. He asked them how they're doing. Vayomer hashalom, and he goes on to say, hashalom avichem hazaken, is your elderly father okay? How is he doing? Asher amarta, asher amartem, which you mentioned, right? This elderly father that you mentioned. Ha'odenu chai, is he still alive? And of course, the brothers are going to understand this simply as, etiquette, decent behavior, the kind of way in which people should behave. But on the other hand, if you look at it from Joseph's point of view, he has it's a very serious question for him. And it's more than just simply showing politeness. Let me see. Okay. Vayomru shalom la'avdecha, and they said, shalom la'avdecha, your servant is fine. He's okay. La'avinu, to our father. Odenu chai, he is still alive. Vayikdu, and they bowed their heads. Rashi explains this term kida. Vayishtachavu, and they then prostrated themselves before him. So clearly, total submission here going on. And of course, think back to those dreams that Joseph had so much earlier on, and look at all that has happened to bring them to this point, and how amazing it is. And I want to mention again, we don't read specifically God's intervening here. We basically read about these, I think, fascinating events that take place to get them to this point. Rashi's going to talk about Kida. Vayikdu vayishtachavu, right? They bowed their heads. Al she'elat shalom. That was when he asked them about how they were faring. They bowed their heads in responding to that. Kida kfifat kod. He says the term kida is the bowing of your head. Hishtachava'ah, on the other hand, this term hishtachava'ah refers to mishtateach la'aretz, that you take yourself, you bow down to the earth. Vayisa enough. He cast his eyes, this is Joseph, of course, cast his eyes, Vayar et Binyamin achiv ben imo, and he saw Benjamin, his brother, son of his mother. Vayomer, and he said to the brothers, Hazeh achichem hakaton, is this your little brother? Asher amartem Eli, which you told me about, whom you told me about. Vayomer, and he said, Joseph went on to say, Elohim yochnecha b'ni. He said, Elohim, God, may God show you favor. May God show you favor. to Benjamin. Elohim yochnecha b'ni. Right, so Rashi's commenting on that phrase. B'sha'ar shvatim, regarding the other tribes, in other words, the other brothers, shamanu chanina, we've already learned their finding grace. Because back in Genesis 33:5, this is when Esau and Jacob meet up, and Esau is asking Jacob about his family, about the men who are surrounding him. Jacob says to Esau, Asher Hanan Elohim et Avdacha. He uses this phrase, which God has graced, with which God has graced your servant. So there is grace referred to, there's some reference to grace with regards to the other brothers. Uvinyamin, but with regard to Benjamin, Adain lo nolad, he had not been born yet. Lachach barcho Yosef bechanina, and for this reason, Joseph blessed him with the words of chanina, of grace, mentioning grace in respect to Benjamin, that they all should have this idea of grace before God. And grace, my understanding, is undeserved forgiveness, undeserved kindness, in that sense. So that's part of what's meant specifically when we're talking about grace. And just going on a little bit more, Vayimaher Yosef, and Joseph hurried up, Ki nichbaru rachamav, because he was moved to compassion, el achiv, regarding his brother. He was overcome, in other words, with a sense of compassion for his brother. You can imagine all this stuff, all this history that he's gone through inside of himself, keeping this all bottled up inside, and now it's just coming and bubbling out. Vayivakesh livkot, and he wanted to cry. He had a need to cry at that point. Of course, just being so moved. Vayavo achadra, and so he went into a room, literally it's the room, but he went into another room, Vayev Shama, and there he wept. So he didn't want to reveal his identity to his brothers as yet, because I would imagine he is not totally, he's in a position where he doesn't completely trust them. He doesn't know all their feelings, and he doesn't know if they would do exactly the same thing again, or if they really feel badly about what they did. And this explains his behavior towards them and why he did what he did. I am going to stop here and save this, please God, for next time. And keep you hanging a little bit. And I'm going to stop the share. And if any of you have any thoughts or comments, I welcome them. Okay. Just taking it all in. All right, so I will stop the share, stop the recording at this point.